The movie starts with a character named Lena, lying on a bed next to a corpse that looks exactly like her. We find out that Lena is someone who's desperately clinging to life, and if she doesn't switch bodies every so often, her body will die, and she'll die with it. That's why Drew, the person in question, constantly switches bodies as soon as signs of decay start to show, because the body he's inhabiting is already dead. We see Drew cutting up Lena's body and burning it in a very remote farm. Afterward, Lena goes back home and starts searching for drugs, as painkillers are what keep the body Drew inhabits alive for a little longer. We also learn that when Drew enters a body, he takes everything from that person, their voice, their memories, everything, and becomes an exact replica of them. Lena had been missing for 3 days, which led her husband, James, to report her disappearance to the police. When she returned, he yelled at her for being gone that long without telling him anything. Drew, in Lena's body, was surprised that all that time had passed while he was asleep, and he tries to stop James from calling the police, knowing they'd surely discover that the real Lena was dead. Drew, still in Lena's body, begs James not to call the police, but James insists that he has to report her return. Drew loses his temper and tries to stop him again, but when James stays firm, Drew grabs a piece of glass and kills him. Drew feels conflicted about what he's doing but knows he has no choice. Drew then dismembers James' body, just like he did with Lena's, and burns it in the same farm. After cleaning up the crime scene, Drew is visited by Officer Freddy, who arrives at the house looking for James, wanting to speak to him. Drew, still posing as Lena, lies and says James went out and hasn't returned yet. Drew lets Officer Freddy inside the house and even offers him coffee. While Freddy is sitting and trying to figure out where Lena was during her disappearance, he starts noticing signs of decay on Lena's body. Knowing he has to act fast, Drew realizes that he needs to take Freddy's body. As soon as Drew touches Freddy's hand, Freddy experiences strange convulsions and his body stiffens, allowing Drew to transfer into Freddy's body. Drew now takes on Freddy's form and memories, then pours gasoline on Freddy's real body and sets it on fire. As he leaves the house, he encounters a delivery man who hands him an order meant for James. When the delivery man asks for payment, Drew just walks away. Later that night, Drew arrives in a well-known drug-dealing area, as he needs more drugs to keep the body going for more than the 6 hours he's used to. He meets a drug dealer and gets a white powdered substance, using it to buy some time. Drew then decides to visit the love of his life, Julia, and will soon find out why she means so much to him. Drew goes to a cafe where Julia, the love of his life, always hangs out. He sits next to her, trying to get closer, but at first, she thinks he's just some guy trying to hit on her. He tells her that he knows her well and notices she comes to the cafe often. Julia asks him if she's being interrogated because of this question, but Drew explains that he's off duty and simply wants to get to know her better. Julia feels more comfortable around him and eventually agrees to go outside with him. As Drew gets closer to her, he suddenly feels pain and realizes that the decay is spreading rapidly across his body. He yells at Julia to stay away from him, not wanting to kill her, as it's something he can't control. He truly loves her and doesn't want to hurt her in any way. Julia leaves while Drew heads to the car where there's a dentist named Sam along with his secretary, Sarah. Drew, still in Freddy's body, kicks Sarah out and gets into the car with Sam. He then takes over Sam's body and memories. Afterward, he puts Sam's corpse in the trunk of the car and heads to the garage to cut it up. However, he receives a message from Sam's wife, asking why he's late. When he returns home, Sam's wife refuses to talk to him because she's upset with him over issues in their relationship, something we won't discuss here. Sam goes to check on his daughter, but she's already asleep. He then goes to bed beside his wife without even trying to apologize. The next morning, Sam's daughter wakes Drew up to have breakfast with them. Sam's wife asks him to sit down and eat, but he refuses after feeling a pain in his stomach. He leaves the house and heads to the clinic. At the clinic, he meets Sarah, the girl he was with the night before. He tries to cheat on his wife with her again, but she rejects him, saying he's under the influence and doesn't know what he's saying or doing. Afterward, he goes to work on a dental case and reassures the child that it's not his first time as a dentist. After the session, he heads out for lunch, but he spots Julia returning to her house. He quickly hails a cab to follow her, but the driver refuses, telling him what he's doing seems suspicious. Drew gets frustrated because he doesn't know Julia's old address. Later, he goes to the movies to distract himself, but people beat him up for laughing too loudly. Drew returns to Sam's house and looks at pictures of Sam's family, which remind him of his own family, all of whom are now gone. He feels sad because he's alone with no family. During dinner, Sam's daughter won't stop talking and asking questions, which greatly irritates Drew, who had initially planned to kill her. However, he decides to leave the house to ensure her safety, as he doesn't want to harm children or their mother. Drew then heads to the bar where Julia usually spends her evenings. As soon as he arrives, Julia recognizes him and tells him he was there the night before with a girl, and it seemed like he liked her. Drew asks how she noticed, and she explains that she's there every night and likes to remember people's faces. She knows most of the people who come to the bar. Julia asks if he likes the girl he was with, but Drew tells her he made a mistake and that it was just a fling because he has a family. He explains that he left his family because they'd be better off without him. Julia responds that what he did was wrong, and leaving his family is never the solution because they need him, even if he thinks he's a bad person. Julia then shares that she once had a family but lost her son when he was 3 years old due to illness. She was deeply affected for a long time and couldn't come to terms with life. However, her husband, Richard, planned a beautiful evening for her and told her they needed to start fresh and forget the past. She listened to him, but sadly, Richard disappeared forever after that night. Drew remembers Richard and seems to know where he is. Do you think Drew did something to Richard? You'll find out the truth when we continue. Drew excuses himself from Julia, telling her he has to leave, especially after noticing that the mold is appearing on his skin again, which means he needs to switch bodies quickly before he dies. He heads to a hotel and rents a room but feels ill and notices that the mold has spread further on his body. He considers going out to switch bodies with someone else but finds no one around. He calls Sarah and asks her to come over. At first, Sarah refuses, but Drew pleads with her, telling her his wife kicked him out and he needs someone to talk to. Sarah agrees to come, but she warns him that she won't stay long because she's seeing someone else. Sarah arrives at the hotel and knocks on the door. Sam tells her to come in, but she hesitates at first. When she enters, she finds the lights off. She turns them on and is horrified by the sight of Sam's decaying body. At that moment, Drew takes over her body. Drew sends a message from Sarah's phone to her mom to let her know she'll be staying out for the night. Drew then takes Sarah's body to the same farm and sets it on fire. However, the neighbor smells the burning and goes over, calling for him since he's been missing for a while, and nobody knows where he is. There's also a foul smell coming from his house. Sarah hides and only comes out when the neighbor stops calling, but she sees her, so Sarah runs quickly, upset because the woman might report her. Drew reaches Sarah's house, changes his clothes, and puts on a nice dress because he's planning to meet Julia. At the same time, Julia's boyfriend is watching her from afar. Drew arrives at the bar in Sarah's body and looks for Julia until he finds her and sits next to her. Meanwhile, the girl who was with Sam starts feeling sick and asks Sarah if she's still with him. Sarah says no, and she also finds out that Sarah is with someone else. Drew, in Sarah's body, asks Julia why she comes here every day, and Julia tells him about her day and how she's a writer who likes to come to the bar to get inspiration. They start chatting, and Drew learns that Julia is a therapist who helps people solve their problems. She gives Drew, thinking it's Sarah, her business card, inviting her to visit if she ever needs to talk. At that moment, a guy comes over and offers to buy Sarah a drink. Drew, in Sarah's body, agrees, sits with him, but leaves him to go to the bathroom. There, he sees that the mold has spread again on Sarah's body. He returns to the guy and asks him to go to Sarah's house together, and the guy agrees eagerly. Before leaving, Drew looks one last time at Julia, who is sitting with a guy named Robert who seems interested in her. Drew takes the guy to Sarah's house, trying to transfer his consciousness into the guy's body, but the mold hasn't spread enough to allow the transfer. When Drew tries to bring the guy down, the guy fights back and tries to assault Sarah's body. But Drew doesn't give in and keeps hitting him until he bleeds. Then, Drew takes a knife and kills the guy as he tries to escape. Drew catches him on the stairs and finishes him off. Afterward, Drew gathers Sarah's clothes and realizes that the landlady has called the police, so he quickly escapes and hides until morning because he knows where the police won't search. The next morning, he notices that the mold has spread even more across Sarah's body. At that point, Sarah's boyfriend shows up, asking her where she's been and what happened. He also asks if she killed someone because there's clearly blood on her clothes. Sarah, Drew, denies it and tries to escape from her boyfriend, who chases after her. She manages to hide in a pickup truck, but while in the truck, she starts feeling pain and sees the mold spreading more and more on her body. While hiding in the truck, she finds Julia's card in her pocket, which Julia gave her at the bar. She remembers when Julia invited her to visit if she ever faced a problem. Drew takes the address from the card and heads straight to Julia's place. When Drew reaches Julia's place, he watches her from a distance with Robert. After Julia and Robert leave, Drew follows them and finds out where Robert lives. He pretends to be a delivery guy and manages to enter Robert's house. We all know what's going to happen next. Drew plans to take over Robert's body as soon as he sees him. Later, Drew calls Julia and tells her that he's interested in her. After discovering that Julia and Robert are planning to get married, Drew tells her he wants to meet because he has something very important to say. Julia agrees and says she'll come to his house, but Drew refuses because he's still in Robert's body. He convinces her that he'll come to her place instead, and she agrees without hesitation. Drew goes to Julia's house, where she plays some music. He's happy because he's finally with her. Julia asks what he wanted to tell her over the phone, and Drew confesses that he's really attracted to her, loves her, and wants to be with her forever. Julia asks how he could fall for her so quickly, but she admits she's also fallen for him, and they agree to be together. They spend the night together, and Julia feels incredibly happy. The next day, Drew wakes up and prepares breakfast for Julia. She's happy because she finally found someone who cares about her. Afterward, Drew goes back to Robert's house, cuts up his body to dispose of it, and dumps it at the same farm so the smell won't spread. We then see Drew spending time with Julia, and they're both very happy, especially Julia, who no longer feels alone, as she's finally found Drew, and he's happy to be with her too. However, when Julia watches the news about the murders and the bodies found at the farm, Drew tells her to stop watching that stuff, fearing she might recognize them. But she does recognize the people and tells Drew it's really scary because she knew all of them, having met them at the bar and even interacted with them. She adds that the fact they died in such a way means there's a killer after them. Drew reassures her that nothing will happen to her. The next day, they're going out, and Drew is in the bathroom when he starts feeling sick and notices his body is starting to rot, meaning he needs to switch bodies. But he's scared to leave Julia, who's waiting for him outside and is already worried sick about him. He decides to tell her the truth, so that when he comes back in a different body, they can still be together. Drew comes out and tells her he needs to talk about something really important. Hearing those words makes Julia anxious, but Drew sits her down and asks her to listen to him until the end. He starts telling his story, saying that when he was 12 years old, he killed his mother and has felt guilty ever since. Julia reassures him, telling him he was just a child and that it was a long time ago, so he shouldn't feel guilty anymore. But then he shocks her by revealing that this happened in 1954, which was a really long time ago. She tells him that's impossible because he looks way too young for that. Drew then explains to her that he took his mother's life, but she didn't die in a normal way. Julia is stunned and thinks maybe he's drunk, but Drew starts explaining that he has a power, though he calls it a curse. He tells her that by touching someone, he can take over their body after a certain amount of time, and that's how he's able to move from body to body. Julia doesn't believe him at first, but Drew proves it to her, explaining that this is exactly how he took over her husband's body. He admits that this is why he loves her, because he felt Richard's love for her. He also tells her that he was the one who spent that last night with her in her husband's body. Julia is shocked, realizing that Drew killed her husband. She tries to kill him in return, and he tries to calm her down, but he can't, fearing that if he touches her, she'll die too. Unfortunately, he accidentally grabs her hand, takes over her body, and she dies. Julia, the very reason Drew has stayed alive this whole time, is gone. Drew is devastated by her death, but he realizes it wasn't something he could control. He goes to the bar afterward and thanks the waitress for looking after Julia when she was feeling down. Since Julia's memories have now transferred to him, Drew feels everything she had experienced. Eventually, Drew decides to stop moving from body to body and finally die. He stays in his current body until it starts to decompose, thinking it's the end for him. But then he wakes up, finding himself strangely reborn in his original body, with his real age and appearance. Drew is completely confused about what's happening to him, or what he has become. He continues living his life, not knowing what fate has in store for him. The movie ends with us not knowing what Drew truly is, and not even he knows what he once was or what he has become. And with that, we wrap up today's movie. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget, if you liked the video, give us a like and subscribe.